Stories are like roller coasters, with each part of the story or ride needing to work in a special way to give a complete emotional thrill ride experience. Notice how our 3-act structure curve resembles a roller coaster in many ways. There's a slow setup similar to the way roller coasters go up steep, slow climbs at the beginning, then drop really fast. That's the inciting incident, that first big drop, which is the first big event when you're on a roller coaster ride. Roller coasters then go up and down, and they do all these like twists maybe, depending on what kind of roller coaster place you're at. And that's very similar to Act 2. There's a lot of kind of up and down action and twist. And then usually they have a climax, kind of triple loop-de-loop curve that then resolves at the end quickly. So it's very similar to story structure. Keep this emotional roller coaster ride metaphor in mind as you build up your story idea, because you want your story to feel like a roller coaster too. Basic story curve. Shown here are the basic plot points for a film using 3-act structure. Write down any ideas for each of the following plot points as I go through them now in your workbook. The first one is a hook. Now this is how you open a film. You have to do something that really pulls the audience into the film quickly. So hooks usually start in the middle of a high-intensity mess. How could you show your main character doing what they do best in your film world, or have them make a really exciting visual entrance into the film? So you may want to think back into your favorite films and how did they introduce the characters to get ideas. And also think of your own story. How are you going to introduce them? And look at their character traits. So what are they best at? Maybe they're doing whatever they're best at in your film world. Setup. How will you introduce us to your character's film world and story? How will you show your character in his or her normal life? So what are they normally doing? The audience needs a chance to get to know your main characters along with the limits and possibilities of the film worlds. So you may be just establishing the antagonist and protagonist and the conflict that's coming up between them, or your secondary characters, or just what's happening in the film world in the setup. The third plot point, which starts Act 2, this is 3 acts, and Act 2 starts at the inciting incident. What event happens that forces your characters to act by choosing a goal and committing to making it happen? And on this chart it says that the inciting incident starts at Act 2, but it can start, you can have your inciting incident as your hook. It could be at the beginning of your film. And you see that a lot more now with modern films. They'll just put the inciting incident first, and then the setup and the hook are all kind of tied in there, and it just sort of rolls into Act 2 right away. But it's up to you. These plot points don't have to occur in this order or with this kind of spacing. This is just the general idea of how you tell a story using 3-act structure. The fourth one is journey into the unknown. Protagonist sets off to accomplish plot goal, leaving what is familiar behind. So usually they go somewhere they've never been before, or they're doing something they haven't done before, because the plot goal is going to force them out of their comfort zone in some way. The fifth one is investigation. Protagonist searches for goal, object, or information, encountering lots of obstacles and conflict. What are some obstacles or conflicts your character might face while attempting to accomplish their plot goal? You would be thinking of antagonist and protagonist, because they both have those plot goals that are in opposition. So what types of obstacles and conflict are they going to come into contact with? The next plot point features a big twist in the middle of the story. This usually happens in the middle of Act 2, but we're seeing a lot more suspense and twist with stories these days, where you'll see twist in each scene. A new plot goal usually emerges in the middle of the story in a feature film, since the first goal is usually accomplished, and it kind of starts to drag if they just have one goal. Sometimes they'll have maybe 5 different goals. They'll have to do a bunch of little things to get their main goal. The next plot point is the final confrontation. This is a confrontation between 2 characters or groups, or a situation that has been building up during the story. So this is usually the protagonist and the antagonist, and once again you could have a group of protagonists and a group of antagonists, or multiple antagonists, but there's some sort of confrontation that comes to a head where they finally meet. Maybe they've been avoiding each other and working around each other, or maybe they knew they were going to meet and there's like this big battle. The next plot point is the climax. This is the point of greatest intensity in a story. This is where everything should be building up to this point, where the audience interest in the plot reaches a crescendo. So you need to ask yourself, what is the big climactic event at the end where we see whether or not the characters succeed or fail at their plot goal? So if their plot goal is to win a race, you just, it's obviously the climax would probably take place right before the finish line, where some kind of crazy thing happens and the character either wins or loses. So that's a good place to look when you're looking at climaxes as your plot goal. So think about that for a minute. How could you have a big event to decide whether or not your character succeeds or fails at their plot goal? And write down any ideas in your workbook. The next plot point is the resolution, and this is usually a really quick plot point. It just ties up the loose ends in the story, such as who lives, who dies, who gets the girl, kind of a quick, like maybe trophy ceremony at a race, who lives happily ever after, and who doesn't. Just really quick tie-up of the story. Now these plot points that we just went through, they don't have to be in this order. You could have the resolution be the beginning. Maybe a character has been arrested and he has to go through and tell a detective what just happened. Or you can come up with lots of ideas to sort of stir-fry your plot points, and in the 20-hour version we go through that a lot on ways to mix up the plot points and story envelopes that you can put around them, where you can tell the story backwards or think up reasons to start at the end, which is popular in films because it kind of draws you in if you can do it in a good way, where you start with some kind of question. Maybe you start with a character you can't quite see that's in jail writing a letter, and then you find out later that that's not the character you thought it was, but it kind of draws you in because you wonder who that character is. So there's lots of ways you can play with it. Take a moment right now to fill in your final plot point ideas for the story that you're working on. And don't get stuck on coming up with the perfect one. And I know we're going kind of fast and this is a lot of information, but just come up with something that would work with the story you're doing, just whatever comes to you that constitutes these plot points, and just write a little sentence for what might happen at each of these points. So take a moment to do that now. In the 20-hour version of this workshop, we go over 40 possible plot points using this 3-act structure with lots of different variations. So if you want to do something like a hero journey, there's plot points for that. We have plot points for tragedies, personal anthologies, ensemble films, postmodern films, city symphonies. Those are stories about a place. So all of these different types of films and stories have different plot point structures. So the ones that I just gave you are really just the basic ones that you need in a story, but there's a lot more that you can add. And once you learn all these plot points, you can mix and match them